And I'll start off by asking you this. So World War II was called the Good War. Why is that? And the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. A pleasure to be with you again, Ray. The Good War. Well, that is American jingoism. And as you just alluded to, the World War II time period is something most Americans, what they think they know is false. And that is, again, due to so many years of what I call dark myths and outright lying propaganda that has been perpetrated again for the agenda of the imperialist United States. The good war. Now, I'm going to think about that. That's what Americans call it. I think about the bombing of Dresden and hundreds of other German cities. Churchill targeted civilians purposefully. I think about Truman dropping the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Unjustified, unnecessary. I think about the German siege of Leningrad and the starvation. Over 1.5 million civilians, Soviets died. Massive suffering. We think about the work camps, the concentration camps, and certainly most of all, I think about those who suffered and died the most. The Soviet Union lost some 27 million people because of this. I'd like to ask, what is good about all that human death and suffering? But the Americans call it the good war. Again, jingoism. It was good for them. They only lost, and all life lost during this is tragic, but they only lost about 400,000. Again, think about the Soviets, 27 million lost. China, millions lost. Europe, devastated. But the Americans call it the good war because it ended with them becoming a superpower. It was good for them economically. It's good for an imperialist power such as the United States. And only an evil nation, and I am sad to have to say that about my own country, but it would only be an evil nation that would call that tragic and unnecessary loss of life good. That's the United States for you.
Yeah, and again, I mean, we talked about it in the last episode, and I've talked about it in practically every episode. It's the people in power at that time, and I think for the United States, it was FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and then into Truman, and we'll talk about those guys in a second. Let me ask you this question on Dresden, on the bombing of Dresden, and then Churchill. It's interesting because you hear about that a lot, and ironically, you've heard about that as a justification by Benjamin Netanyahu for what he's doing in Gaza. And like the past 18 months, I can't tell you how many times I've heard Israeli government officials almost say, well, you guys did it in Dresden to, anyone English that brings it up. And they literally say, well, what's the difference with that and what we're doing? Explain that whole Dresden situation. And again, that was done by Churchill, who has been applauded as a hero, but I don't know. I feel like everybody's peeling back the onion on everything these days, and they're calling into question everything. So can you help us understand the Dresden thing for a second before we move on?
Yes, and it will lead me to what I want to share with you about Churchill. Of course, they're going to equate that. They are of the same mindset. Human life means nothing to that human demon, Netanyahu, just as human life meant nothing to Churchill. And frankly, I believe that Churchill is one of the most evil individuals that have ever lived historically. I do not believe that World War II, the escalation to an intercontinental war as it became, would have occurred had it not been for Churchill. Frankly, in terms of an individual, everybody looks to and cites Hitler. We are always going to have those who may start out with a good cause, but because of their own egotistical aims and an evil aim, go beyond what was right to do. We're always going to have individuals like that. But when we look at a power such as Churchill had with Britain and the United States, it did not have to escalate. And frankly, I do not believe we would have had the massive loss of life if not for Winston Churchill. In terms of Dresden, you asked about that specifically. As I said, of course they're going to equate it because they both have the same values. human life means nothing to the government of that Zionist state, just as human life meant nothing to Britain, its government at the time. And frankly, I will add this, nor does it mean anything to the US government at this time. Dresden, sadly, was just one of hundreds of cities. Certainly, it is the one most people are aware of. But when I went back and read, and I've read many of the documents and the correspondences between Churchill and the generals and the books that were written thereafter, Churchill got glee out of attacking the civilians of Germany. It was purposeful. And it's a really that it points to how we began this, the lies and dark myths that people believe to consider him a good statesman when he was evil to the core, as far as I am concerned, just like Netanyahu is. So yes, certainly they would equate it, and the Americans certainly have nothing to say about it. And obviously they're funding it and providing the weapons. It's all just theater between themselves to justify their evil.
Want the full truth? Watch the full Deep Shallow Dive interview next. And hit subscribe if you're done with narratives and ready to call a spade a spade.